IoT is red hot in China. Stay tuned as we focus on news around IoT, as well as Jasper's recent deal with China Unicom, our recent visit to Shenzhen for the Huawei Developers Conference, and we'll talk a little bit about an industrial IoT panel we had last week.
This episode of IoT Innovation is sponsored by Anritsu.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com.
Thank you for joining this week's IoT Innovation. My name is Jeff Mucci, and I'll be filling in for Chris Hare. Today our guest is Sanjay Khatri, who's Senior Director of Product Marketing for Jasper. Sanjay, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, today we're going to cover a couple top stories, including the Jasper deal with China Unicom, and some highlights from the Huawei Developers Conference that we attended this week, and a few highlights from our panel discussion at the RCRatx Studio Lounge we held last week with Gemalto, Silicon Labs, National Instruments, and tech analyst Patrick Moore. But first, there are a couple of pieces of news this week that caught my attention. ABI Research came out with a report that talked about China IoT revenue will outpace all countries by 2020. They project $41 billion of revenue from the China market alone, and they say that China leads all other segments in both connections and revenues. In fact, they say by 2020, the China smart meter connections will exceed the next highest market segment in total connections by a ratio of 10 to 1. And if you look back on some other articles about IoT, IDC sees the IoT market growing to 1.7 trillion. So you got some big numbers thrown around there. We know it's going to be big. We just don't know how big. But I think today's show is really going to focus on the China IoT market, and the China government had put a stake in the sand around 2010, 2011, saying that IoT was going to be an important part of their overall technology plan, and the Ministry of Industry and Technology was quoted as saying they're going to focus on industrial control, agricultural, smart grid, public safety, and intelligent transportation systems. I was in Shenzhen earlier this week at a developers conference, and clearly some of the examples they showed, Huawei showed at that program, were very much aligned with those industrial control, agricultural, transportation, smart meter type technologies. But Sanjay, I know you have spent time in China, so why don't we switch gears and talk a little bit about Jasper's deal with Unicom, and maybe share your experiences with how that deal was put together and what you're seeing in China.
Sure. So we launched with China Unicom about 3 months ago, and we have seen tremendous amount of uptake on the Unicom services and the platform that Jasper is providing through Unicom. In fact, we've seen in the last 3 months alone over 500 enterprises actually order the trial kits from Unicom. Trial kits typically include some wireless SIMs and an access or an account on the Jasper platform through the Unicom offering. And essentially, these enterprises are able to use these SIMs and the connections into the various devices that they are looking to deploy, and do it in a managed way through the platform, so that they have not just a connection, but also a platform underneath it to help them manage their deployment of their services. So again, we've seen just a tremendous amount of interest and uptake on these services across just a wide variety of different verticals and application use cases.
Oh, you talked about the platform, Jasper, the Jasper platform. Is that the same thing as in the press release you talked about this control center? What is?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, and essentially the platform, what we like to say is it's built to allow enterprises and various organizations deploy, manage, and monetize their IoT services. And what we mean by that is that enterprises who are looking to add connectivity into their products and even their services. So an example would be in a fleet type of a solution where you are adding connectivity into a truck. You are now not only operating a truck, but you're operating a service via the truck in the fact that that truck is constantly connected. There are services being offered through that connectivity. And so for entities that are managing these fleets, they need to be able to embrace a service model, not just essentially operating a truck, but operating a connected service around it. And that's really what the platform is designed to do, is to help them essentially deploy the connected service and manage it on a day-to-day basis and monetize it in the sense that they can use the platform to control costs. If they are providing additional services through that connectivity, for example, in the fleet management scenario, providing weather or traffic information to the drivers of the fleet. There may be partnerships involved where you're adding third-party content into the cab of the truck that are also need to be monetized. So there's various facets of monetization, both on the cost side as well as on the revenue side. So these three different things are really what the platform is designed to do, is to allow enterprises to quickly deploy connected services, manage it on a day-to-day basis, and then be able to monetize it.
And you mentioned 500 companies had signed up for the enterprise edition, if you will. What sort of verticals have signed up?
We see a lot of there's certainly a lot of diversity in the enterprises that have signed up, and this is typical in most of the markets that we go in. We just see a tremendous amount of interest. The key question is which are the verticals that really take off, and universally, I would say anything to do with automotive and transportation tends to become a big segment that actually embraces wireless or cellular IoT and really deploys it on a large scale, on a large scale basis. And so things around fleet management, transportation, automotive OEMs, where they're embedding connectivity into the vehicle itself for various different types of services, whether it's safety, security, and diagnostic services, or providing Wi-Fi hotspots, providing infotainment services in an OEM type of a offering, and then also in an aftermarket offering where you have just a whole host of companies that are deploying devices or manufacturing devices that are plugged into the OBD2 ports of vehicles that can then provide these types of services in an aftermarket basis, including services like usage-based insurance that are taking advantage of the vehicle connectivity to provide intelligent insurance services.
Now, you mentioned the solution you announced was principally cellular. Are you limited to cellular only as a platform?
The platform itself is not limited to cellular alone. We have embraced cellular as a key component of our platform, and the reason for that is, one of the things that you hear a lot about in the IoT business is that it's very fragmented. There's different types of devices, there are different types of wireless connectivity, different types of connectivity in general. The application arena is also very fragmented. And when Jasper ventured out in the M2M and now IoT space, our focus was in looking at an area where we could standardize a platform and create a very broad-based horizontal offering. And clearly, the cellular network gave us that platform, if you will, to build that horizontal capability. And so, in particular, the GSM network, I think, is a very standardized technology across pretty much all over the world, and so it became a very logical thing for us to essentially use GSM connectivity as a way to standardize a platform for managing communication or for managing IoT services.
Mm-hmm. Well, what can you tell us? Well, actually, going back to cellular, is it LTE or is it 3G in terms of what you deployed with China Unicom?
It's both. It's both 3G as well as LTE. In other markets also, we see just a range of GSM technologies, 2G, 3G, LTE. So we span the entire GSM spectrum, if you will.
Got it. And what can you tell us about the modules and how customizable those modules are for the applications you're seeing with Unicom?
Well, so the modules, just to be clear, we don't actually produce any of the modules per se. The modules are standard GSM modules that are, again, either 2G, 3G, or LTE modules. And as long as they comply with the 3GPP specs or the GSM specs for those different radio technologies, our platform will support it. So, and that's again the advantage of having a standardized or a standard like GSM around which module manufacturers can build these very low-cost modules that can be in various different form factors, at a component level or as a complete module that gets added onto a product, after it's been deployed. All of those options are available now because you have, a standardized form factor, if you will, that you can use to deploy connected services on.
Okay. I guess when we first started talking, you talked about SIM-based endpoints. So I'm just trying to understand what those endpoints look like today in China.
So, again, it depends on the different verticals. If you look at the automotive segment, you have the modules that are part of the embedded electronics of the vehicle itself. So you have in most cases in the automotive sector, it tends to be LTE, an LTE module that's essentially embedded in the vehicle itself. That's then connected to the various systems of the vehicle, the CAN bus, other peripherals of the vehicle that can then use that communications module to get connected out into the cloud and into other services. If you look at other types of verticals like retail, point of sale, you may have vending machines that have essentially wireless modems that are attached into the vending machines that then have various different connections into the electronics of the vending machine itself for payment processing or for stocking information, etc. So again, the form factors vary depending on the use case. Everything from embedded to essentially, if you will, an aftermarket type of a module that gets added onto an asset that needs to be connected.
Yeah, well, just help me understand how you got this announcement with China Unicom. You've got a platform in place. Walk me through how all these endpoints start getting connected into the Jasper platform. Is that a long process, a short process? Again, I'm still trying to make the connection in my mind between different endpoints that you just described in an actual physical deployment.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, we have over 500 enterprises that have already ordered and started using these trial kits. And essentially these trial kits include the SIMs that actually can be used to connect any particular device into the Unicom network, and also an access into the platform, again, to help them deploy these devices, meaning, turn them on, turn them off, turn them on with the right set of services, and then, monitor usage, create different types of business rules that allows them to monitor usage on a day-to-day basis, and then obviously look at what their usage costs are and so on and so forth. So all of that is sort of bundled, if you will, the SIM and the platform capabilities. So you can imagine a UBI or usage-based insurance vendor that has a UBI dongle that they want to now had connectivity via Unicom, ordering one of these trial kits and testing out the SIMs with their devices, connecting into the Unicom network, also getting access to the platform, and essentially seeing these devices connect into the network, how they're performing, create all sorts of different business rules about when they can connect, how much data they can use, and all those sorts of things. And so it's a very easy process for them to actually get this going, as long as they have an asset that they have ready that they can connect with, or that they intend to connect to the Unicom network. And as long as it's, again, GSM compliant with 2G, 3G, LTE capability, then it's as simple as essentially adding the SIM and getting onto the platform to be able to then manage that connected device. And then they do this on a trial basis, and at some point they feel that they're comfortable enough with the way the devices are behaving on the network and how they've been able to set up business processes around it through the platform, then they can go into a much bigger scale production deployment.
And so how do you go from so you said you ship SIMs with the toolkit or the test kit. How do you go from testing to deploying 10,000? Does Jasper ship the SIM? Does Unicom fulfill the SIM? Does the customer buy the SIM? How does that work?
It's generally a mix of different models. Typically, the operator will ship the SIMs, but we have started seeing increasingly where manufacturers are getting involved, where they're essentially putting in embedded SIMs these are solderable SIMs that actually go onto the device or the asset that they want to connect. Then ordering these embedded SIMs, if you will, directly from the SIM manufacturers like the Gemaltos and the G&Ds, and then of course having that service relationship with Unicom where you have access to use the network via those SIMs. So it's a mix of the models, but Jasper doesn't physically ship any of the SIMs. It's either the operator Unicom that ships the SIMs, or in the case of a manufacturing supply chain type of a scenario where the manufacturer is actually ordering the SIMs directly from the SIM manufacturers.
And so assuming that either the customer or Unicom puts 10,000 SIMs out in the market for one client, how does the Jasper platform know to discover and find and identify and track those specific SIMs?
Sure. So we have access into the Unicom HLR. Yep. One of the things that our platform does is, which is unique in terms of how we've gone about deploying our platforms, is that it's deeply integrated into the operator's network, both into the packet core network, the circuit switch network, as well as the back-end OSS, BSS, or IT systems of the operators themselves. So we have this unique combination of a software as a service integration, both on the IT side as well as on the network side through these integrations into the various network elements. So we can see instantly when a certain batch of SIMs, if you will, have been shipped to a customer. We see them on the HLR. We can then allocate them to the particular enterprise, and at that point, the whole point is to allow enterprises to have a level of self-sufficiency of how they want to deploy their services without Unicom or Jasper getting into the mix and slowing things down. And so now the enterprises themselves have direct control into the operator's network to be able to manage these devices as they see fit according to their service needs.
Got it. Well, any other kind of key takeaways you'd like to share with us regarding your recent announcement in China?
Well, so one thing that is very clear to us is that the projections and the hype about the Chinese market, while there obviously is some hype around IoT, we're starting to see in real terms that it really is coming to fruition, just given the evidence that we've seen in the last few months in the amount of interest that Unicom's announcement and offering has garnered. And the other interesting thing, I think, is the diversity of the use cases. As I mentioned, we talked about fleet and automotive applications, but we're starting to see very, very innovative new application spaces. One of the spaces that interestingly enough in China is wellness monitoring. So as you can imagine, a lot of young people move to the cities. They have parents that are in homes that they want to keep in touch with and keep track of. So wellness monitoring for assisted living type of scenarios is an interesting space. The other one is something that the Chinese call online to offline, which is you have a lot of people who are living in cities that are living in these high-rise buildings, and there's a lot of delivery that goes on, whether it's food or groceries, what have you. And so all of these vending machines that get stocked in the lobbies of these buildings have an ability to get connected, and so provide that sort of the level of service or an intelligent level of service, so that the recipients knows when the items have been delivered. So all of these different innovative new models in the sort of the commercial space. And of course, you have in the government space, as you mentioned, there's a big emphasis from the government on streamlining a lot of the urbanization process that they've undergone, whether it's through smart transportation, areas like environmental monitoring for pollution, et cetera. So again, these are both on the private sector as well as in the public sector. We see just a tremendous amount of interest in all of these different areas.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about the Huawei Developers Conference that we attended. Firstly, it was attended by upwards of 2,000 developers, and the emphasis was really on enterprise, which mirrors our conversation today. It was not as much, it didn't really talk about the wearables sector to some degree with the healthcare and wearables, but the health monitoring. But the bulk of it was really around the infrastructure Huawei was putting in place. They've got a product called their IoT Connection Manager, which is really designed to open up network APIs, open up security APIs, and provide for data analytics coming out of the network, which I thought was really interesting. And they talked heavily about their cloud offerings, so that if you're an enterprise and wanted to get an IoT application up and running very quickly, you could leverage the Huawei cloud platform. You could leverage their connection manager. And one of the other comments I thought was interesting was earlier this year, Huawei announced a 10 kilobit IoT operating system they called Light OS. Now, maybe you can shed some light on this, Sanjay, but when they talk about a Light OS, they're really talking about an operating system that would go on a sensor or a microprocessor. How familiar are you with that segment of the market, and how does that type of sensor-based operating system play into a Jasper platform?
Sure. So, we obviously see a lot of interest in various different enterprises, entities, who are looking at, just a growing number of use cases. And when you think about putting in, it's nice to think about, everything being connected, but obviously there's a price associated with it. The price in the hardware, the price in the connectivity, the practicality of it. Can you in fact have a sensor that's sitting out on the field that's constantly connected, that doesn't need tending to on a daily, weekly basis? These are all practical considerations. So I think the industry at large is looking at the various different ways in which the sort of this 50 billion connected devices that everybody talks about can be realized, and everybody's working at the sort of the practical aspects of this problem. So clearly, there are issues at the device level where you want to have very low-cost, simple devices that do simple things, monitor soil temperature or some other environmental metric that you want to get, and do it in a way where there's very little battery or there's very little power consumption, but it also can then connect into a broader system, whether it's in the cloud or with other machines that then can provide an additional level of intelligence beyond that simple device. So these are, the practical aspects from the hardware perspective, and we see the similar issue or aspect of this in the connectivity or in the communications part of it as well, where as you're simplifying these devices for long power or long battery life, as well as for low cost, you're also looking at ways in which the communications part of it can also be very lightweight, can be long range and low power, and all of these different aspects that are required. And so some of the advances that we're seeing, are, as you may have heard of things like LoRa. Sigfox is an entity that gets that's been getting cited quite often around these low power wide area networks. But now we've seen that the 3GPP community has also jumped in with LTE narrowband. And so all of this put together is essentially allowing this environment where you can in fact connect more and more things, and connect them in a way that it's economical, that it can be connected over a long period of time, and gets over some of these practical hurdles about, do I need to have them 100, 200 feet next to an antenna versus, being a kilometer, 2 kilometers out in the field, but then that can last for, 10 years, if you will, on a AA battery.
So when you said narrowband, is that the same thing as LTE-M for machine to machine?
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. I'm sure the nomenclature is going to get refined, but the latest nomenclature that I've actually come across and seen is LTE-NB, narrowband, using the narrowband segment of the frequency to essentially use it specifically for machine type communications.
Got it. And you mentioned LoRa and Sigfox, and then we talked about narrowband and LTE-M. Do you see those technologies? How will they fit into the Jasper platform?
Well, so our fundamental value proposition is that just providing connectivity alone is not enough. I think businesses need to be able to essentially transform the way they do their business. When you are connecting a vehicle, GM is no longer just producing a car, they're producing a service experience. And our value proposition to enterprises is that we are going to help you go from a products-oriented view to a services-oriented view. And that's where I think the promise of IoT lies. GE talks about not selling jet engines, but selling, trust as a service.
Yep.
And as futuristic and far-fetched as that sounds, we're already starting to see some of that happening. We have enterprises like Konica Minolta that have shifted away from selling copiers and printers to essentially leasing them on a pay-per-page basis. And so connectivity becomes an essential ingredient in how you turn that product into a service model. And so the platform is really designed around helping these types of enterprises who haven't had an experience in a subscription economy, if you will, to be able to add that element into their business model. So, going back to your question about how does that then relate to these other technologies, I think we are technology agnostic in that sense. Now, as I mentioned, we've chosen the GSM and 3GPP world just because standardization allowed us to build this very horizontal platform. But at this point, we have the critical mass, we have the expertise, we have the core competencies built in to use those same principles across other types of connectivity technologies, including LoRa and even some of the unlicensed connectivity technologies.
Got it. Well, again, I mentioned earlier the panel we had last week where we had Gemalto, National Instruments, Silicon Labs, and a tech analyst, Patrick Moorhead. One of the key questions we asked them was the role of mobile operators in the IoT world, and we've got a clip that I'll show from that conversation. But I'm curious from your standpoint. What do you see as the role of mobile operators? Do you see them as being central to every one of your deployments, or do you see increasingly the opportunity to work directly with enterprise customers in creating private networks and private solutions?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things when we talk about the mobile operators. So first of all, let's look at fundamentally the cellular network itself. Why was that the at the forefront, if you will, of the IoT revolution, right? So if you think about connected cars, even smart meters and so forth, a lot of them have embraced standardized cellular networks for deployment. And a key aspect of that is that it's out of the box. You take a hospital equipment like an MRI machine. This is a practical example where companies that are selling medical equipment into hospitals, they were finding it very difficult to connect their assets to provide that connected service because they had to go and negotiate with the hospital IT to open up firewalls, to get the right permissions and et cetera, to be able to then connect their assets. Now they go in with a connected medicine cabinet, if you will, and they have wireless SIM-based connectivity, and it's out of the box, and they really circumvent all of those hurdles, if you will. And so the barrier to entry to provide a connected asset becomes much, much less. So because of that, I think the wireless cellular network has become very popular, particularly in these early stages of IoT deployments. And the question is whether that's going to continue and be at the forefront, if you will. And as we talked about the advancements that they are looking into for example, in LTE machine type communications, that just expands the horizon, if you will, for the types of devices that can in fact use the cellular network. So I think that's a key point to make. A lot of the discussion around IoT gets sort of wrapped into the whole, home environment, smart homes with the Wi-Fi connections and so forth, which is, I think, which is important, which is an important segment. But I think there's a certain amount of, there's certainly a lot of applicability of standardized wireless connectivity through, it being secure, it being out of the box, to all sorts of industrial applications. So I think the mobile operators, just from that point alone, are going to continue to play an important role in this. And I think the other thing is that what we've seen as far as, through our partnerships with, over 27 major operator groups around the world, is that they are open to opening up their networks to be able to be the enablers of IoT services. They're no longer this closed system where you connect into their network and you don't know what happens after that, and you have very little visibility and control into how that happens. We're seeing that model change where they realize, the operators realize that if enterprises are going to embed connectivity and use that connectivity for smarter applications and smarter services, then they're going to have to cede some of that control to the enterprises. And the Jasper platform is sort of a case in point of how they're actually doing that, where an enterprise can actually see how their devices are talking to the various network elements in an AT&T's network or in a Unicom's network, which is unprecedented. So I think that the landscape is shifting, where operators are starting to see that they need to be more collaborative with the larger enterprise group in order for those enterprises to take advantage of their networks.
So one of the value propositions of Jasper would be, the multi-carrier an enterprise operating in a multi-carrier environment. Is that safe to say?
Correct.
Okay, so you've got API access to multiple carriers and open up the network for an enterprise to multiple carriers.
That's right. The IoT business or the IoT application is in most cases, is a global application. When GM builds a car, they don't build a car, just for the U.S. They build the car for North and South America or for Europe, and so they're looking at it as a service that transcends borders and geographies, transcends networks, and so it's important for them to have a platform and an operational framework, an operational and business framework that allows them to standardize once, but then have access to various different geographies and networks. And so Jasper is essentially allowing them to do that with our integration into, again, we have 27 operator groups that represent over 100 networks in all of these different countries. So a company like GM can essentially integrate once and be assured that they can have that same operational and deployment model in all of the other countries that they where they have an operator that has also embraced the Jasper platform.
Well, let's and wrapping up here today, I got two questions for you. Where do you see the intersection between the world of IoT and 5G?
Well, I think a lot of the industry at large would say, let's digest 3G and LTE first before we talk about 5G.
Yeah.
I think clearly, in the IoT world, it's not so much about bandwidth, obviously. Where when we talk about 4G and 5G, the headline is always about faster networks. Latency is another issue, which is important, and it could be important for a lot of IoT use cases, a medical device, for example, where you want very fast connectivity. But by and large, the 80–90% of IoT applications are, low data and are not as latency sensitive. A smart meter, if it takes, 2 seconds as opposed to, 1 second to upload its, daily meter reading, it's not a very big deal. It more than the advancement in bandwidth or latency or some of these other measures that typically get cited when we go from one generation to another. It's really about optimizing the communication channel itself for these devices that are very low powered, long range, which consume very little data, which have very efficient models where they go to sleep, for example, in periods of inactivity to conserve power. All of these things are important, and to the extent that the 3GPP community can embrace that and can incorporate that into the 5G standard, I think is going to be the key for us as we look at this market. And the signs are very promising, given the fact that in the LTE or 4G or LTE space, they have essentially come to an agreement, if you will, on what that would look like. So I expect that to continue in the 5G evolution as well.
Well, Sanjay, we're in mid-October here. We're coming up on November, December. It's one of RCR Wireless's favorite time of year because we get to ask people, what are the big projections you see, or big trends, or big ahas for 2016? So what's your big prediction for 2016?
Oh boy, you're going to put me on a spot there. So, for one thing, I think that not to kind of continue on the same theme here, but certainly the extension of the wireless network into some of these other areas, particularly around through LTE narrowband, I think is going to be critical. I'm going to be very interested in seeing to what extent the vendor community actually embraces this and starts building products that actually can be deployed in the 2017 timeframe. I think that's going to be a key thing for us. and so that's one area where where I'd be very interested in seeing.
When you say the vendor community, which vendors are you referring to?
Well, I'm talking about the module manufacturers and the folks who are actually building the Sierra Wirelesses and the Gemaltos and the Tellits and even the Intels and the folks who are building processor level components. To what extent they are going to embrace the kind of larger ecosystem that's going to be built around these types of long range, low power networks. I think that's going to be critical, and particularly when you consider that a lot of operators are looking to sunset their 2G networks, refarm that spectrum for other applications, and so there needs to be an alternative. And I actually think that there's almost going to be sort of a leapfrog going from the vast majority of 2G devices that are out there into one of these newer technologies that is in fact more efficient, and essentially skipping over 3G or HSPA types of networks. And so you kind of have that effect there. So I think that'll certainly help in expanding the applicability of cellular IoT. The other thing I think is that I think connected car, we saw that 2015 was just a phenomenal year as far as the vendor community or the OEM community embracing connected car, and I think 2016 will continue to see that, where it is going to be not just in some of the models that some of these OEMs are producing, but in most of the models that they're producing. And I think that's then going to open up a whole ecosystem of other services around usage-based insurance, around possibly marrying the connected car environment with the connected home, so that you have these two ecosystems now coming together. I think those are some of the areas where I think there's going to be a lot more promise. The third one I think is, one of the area that I'd be very interested in is, I think that, as we talked about this whole transformation that IoT enables, where you go from selling a product to selling a service, I think a lot of what IoT is currently being used for is for, operational optimization, to reducing operational costs, for support, for remote diagnostics. I think where the real promise of IoT is when you can enable new service models. And so the example of GE selling not engines, but selling thrust as a service, I think we've yet to see more of these, proliferation of more of these models. I think they are sort of kind of looming in the horizon. They just haven't come out yet. But I think that that's an area where I'd be very interested to see, more of the enterprise community start to actually making a serious business out of embracing the service as a model.
Yeah, it's a great point. One of the other case studies that Huawei presented last week was a compressor company that instead of selling a compressor, they're basically offering their customers a compressor on a use basis. So on the number of hours used. I think, and I've mentioned this several times on previous shows, but Jeffrey Amelt talking about at GE embracing IoT and applications, and you could certainly see them with the turbine engines and other industrial products offering the service on a use basis versus a one-time sale. But we're out of time today, Sanjay. I really appreciate you joining us today, and I want to thank everybody else for joining this week's episode of IoT Innovation. I recommend you check out the industrial IoT panel discussion we had last week. It's on our website, and then keep your eye open for coverage of the Huawei Developers Conference, and we'll shed some light on those network APIs, data APIs, and security APIs. Sanjay, thanks again. Have a great weekend.
Thank you for having me.
IoT Innovation is a production of RCR TV. To reach Chris Hare or suggest a show topic for IoT Innovation, you can reach Chris at cbh@ntete.com. To find out more about IoT innovation and all things wireless, visit rcrwireless.com.